Fog lay pearl blue over the honeywine and clung to the high tower's pale flanks like breath upon a mirror. Bells murmured out on the river, muffled as though spoken through wool. Gulls drifted low, white letters on a gray page. The morning smelled of wet rope, rotting weed, and the faint tang of ink that seeped from the Citadel's stones as naturally as sap from pine. One by one the lamps along the river stairs were snuffed by novices with charcoal fingers, and the long steps of Old Town woke in a hush, as if the entire city had drawn a careful breath and dared not spend it. Soreth came with the first raft of bargemen, coat hem damp and coarse with river grit, boots kissing the slick boards that led from the water stairs into the arcades of the Citadel. He had a scholar's chain begun about his throat. 3 links only, pewter, lead, and copper, a poor chime when they touched, but even those little rings carried weight upon his collarbone, a pressure he felt most sharply on mornings like this. He kept one palm on his satchel to steady the ledger within. The bindings had swollen from last night's damp. Down the arcade, candles were being trimmed. He caught the boyish face of a novice he did not know, scratching resin from his sleeve, yawn wide enough to swallow a fish. Soreth nodded a greeting and passed like a shadow. The Citadel at dawn was a cathedral of small sounds. The shiver of a tower door settling back into its jamb, the coo and shuffle from the Ravenry several levels up, the rasp of a broom on flagged stone, and beneath it all the patient heartbeat of river against quay. Soreth had come to love those sounds as one might love the little noises of a sleeping house. He loved the smell of vellum that still bore the faint hair scent of the beast it had been. He loved the iron taste of ink when he chewed his reed pens in thought. He loved, though he had once feared, the dark-tempered gaze of the Archmaesters whose rings were a nightly thunder when they gathered in conclave. He had been a beekeeper's son on the arbor, his life once measured by the bloom of apple and the turning of comb. Now his days were measured by folios and flasks and the minute-precise observances that kept the Citadel's breath moving. He crossed beneath the arch carved with owls and lanterns and came into the scribe's yard. A wind stirring off the river combed the hair on his nape. In the far corner, an old man bent over a basin, scrubbing a quill of its brownness, lips moving with the wordless song of habit. Soreth paused by the basin, dipped his fingers in, and let the chill water grit his skin awake. It was his day for birds, and birds were a jealous duty. He dried his hands on his coat hem and took the narrow stair that climbed and climbed toward the Ravenry with a caution bred of many bruised toes. Maester Ulmer's voice met him on the last flight. The great man had a face like weathered oak and a temper to match. He smelled of grain and soot and the sour sweetness of fruit that had gone too long in a barrel. He was muttering to the birds, those restless scholars with their winged gloss on every matter under heaven. We speak our letters, we keep them ember warm, we keep tidy. We do not mangle the wax, and we do not. Here the voice grew dangerously soft. Gnaw at the linguist's thumb, you white devil. Soreth crossed the threshold. The Ravenry's warmth embraced him in a rush of ammonia and feathers and the hopelessly old smell of wood that had absorbed a century of droppings. Ropes crisscrossed overhead with perches and little doors. On the work table lay small brass canisters like truncated flutes, lined in 2 rows as neatly as soldiers. He set his ledger down, smoothed its swelling boards in a kind of apology, and tied on the stained apron kept for bird mornings. Late, Ulmer said, without looking up. Only by the measure of the first bell, Soreth said, wiping the perch rail with the economy of someone who had done it many times. The fog. Fog. Ulmer made a sound that might, in a kinderman, have become a laugh. The river drinks lambs and drunks by fog alone, yet none of them blame it. You were born nearer the sea than these birds were. Mind the slate pan. The new batch of salts makes them drink like merchants. Soreth nodded and moved along the line of cages, addressing each bird as he had been taught, not by its name, for the Citadel did not name birds, but by a description of the place it served. King's Landing hand, drink for me, he murmured, gently sidestepping a peck. Black Crown letter, you will not chew the wax. You wretched creature, we have discussed this. His hands found the rhythm of it. It was a pleasure, the way a well-learned knot was a pleasure. Bow, twist, tuck, a little ballet of deftness. As he worked, Ulmer turned, thrust something into Sorith's pocket without looking to see if he'd noticed, and said, "After birds, the archivist wants the second tally. The new enumeration of the far cellar shelves. Are you faithful to it?" "Faithful," Sorith said, meaning yes. He did not ask which archivist. It was always the archivist when Ulmer said it, as if there were only one, and perhaps in his mind there was. "And after the tally," Ulmer went on, "take this to Archmaester Cathan." He gestured at Sorith's pocket with an oily thumb, leaving a wing-shaped mark on his apron. "Nodelai, the old wall by the fish mosaic. 4th door, 7 locks. Mind the 4th, it sticks." Sorith felt for the object. It was a sealed tube of some dark wood, warm to his touch, with a cap of coin-bright metal and a seal impressed with a sigil he did not recognize. A quill circled by a loose wreath, or was it a flame? The wax was soot-black. "Is this for conclave?" he asked quietly. His stomach had made a small tremor at the name Cathan. He had seen the Archmaester twice at lectures. A lean man in a plain robe whose chain was a dark map of the Citadel's aspirations. He spoke without flourish, and sometimes, when he paused in a thought, the air around him seemed to lean forward, the very silence impatient to know what he would say. "Does conclave send birds?" Ulmer said. "Do not ask. It soils your teeth. Mind the locks." Sorith minded the birds, and, when they were watered and crumbs brushed and the escort raven for Blackcrown had finally been discovered standing on the sill with a nail in its beak as if it had forged it, he signed Ulmer's ledger and took his leave. He set his satchel aside and weighed the tube in his palm, hearing nothing when he shook it. Not a sand grain of sound. The mention of the fish mosaic had pricked a part of his mind that kept small secret maps. There was a corridor in the old foundation where the air was cool even in high summer, and under one arch a mosaic of fish spiraled in the river blue of small tiles. He had never gone looking for doors there. It was a place the staff used. Water came up in pipes behind those antique stones. He took the tube between thumb and forefinger as if it was a quill too fine for his clumsy hand, and set off down a stair he did not usually take. In the yard the fog felt thinner now. The river flexing in morning sun kept at bay by the cloud. He crossed near a group of novices arguing, the way boys argue about women they had never touched and wars they had never seen. One of them gave Sorith a sidelong look and fell silent, and he felt like a small coin dropped into a pocket. The awareness that his quietness and the age at his cheek made some think him distant and others think him secretive. He kept walking. It was the Citadel's first commandment that some doors were not to be measured by the footfalls that approached them. The old corridor was older than the rest. You felt it in the way the walls bent and the faint curve of the ceiling, a different geometry than the squared temper of the newer works above. Torchlight exposed a mosaic of tiny fishes whose glass eyes seemed to watch him approach. He had seen it once in company with his master when they came to speak to a plumber's guild man about an angry pipe that had bucked its bolts and hissed like a snake. The fish had been impressed by none of it. Sorith put his free palm to the wall near their fins. The stone was warmer than he expected. He frowned and looked more closely. Tucked into the seam between two tiles was a pin of iron. He drew it out, tested its old bite with the pad of his finger, and then, not entirely sure whether he was following instruction or instinct, pressed it into a hole he had taken for a flaw. Something inside the wall clicked. The 4th lock, Ulmer had said, sticks. Sorith leaned his shoulder to the door stone. It yielded, and the wall sighed open like a man who had at last unburdened his chest of a secret. He was met instantly by a perfume unfamiliar to him. Not the resin sour of the Ravenry, not the vinegar tang of ink, not even the clean medicinal bitterness of the infirmary. This was sweet and metallic at once, like rain on a brazier. Rose water poured into a pan of hot iron. Candlelight in the passage flickered without wind. He stepped through. The hatchway closed behind him without a hand, and he faced a second door of iron-bound oak worked with 7 locks in a flowering pattern like the starry face of a mandala. He lifted the knocker because it resembled a task, and the act of performing a task steadied him. The sound the iron made upon iron was duller than a bell ought to be, intimate as skin meeting skin. A woman opened the door. She was not old. The first thing he thought was that she should have been older if she stood at such a door. The second thing was that she had eyes like the glass beads in the fish mosaic, and any woman who had eyes like that in a place like this was fierce or foolhardy or both. She wore a simple gown under a robe that had too much light in it to be plain. Some silk, he thought. Her hair was bound in a manner he associated with the free cities, too loose for septas and too candid for ladies. The scent of rain on iron and roses deepened. "Ulmer's boy," she said, as if she had been expecting exactly that. "I am not a boy," Soreth said, and then wished he had not. It was childish to contradict. "No," she said, and it was impossible to know whether she agreed or mocked. Her eyes glanced at his chain. 3 links. It is the third that makes you careful. The first makes you proud. The second makes you wary. The third makes you quiet. She regarded his hands as if reading a script there. "Bring the tube." He stepped inside, and the room beyond showed its teeth. The iron smell came from an array of tools whose edges warmed in the light like animals at rest. There were glass alembics and copper retorts and mortars of dark stone. There were bowls of fruit where no flies dared, and there were racks of bones, small and meticulous and labeled with fine, diamond-hard penmanship. Fin, rib, phalanx, tooth. The walls were lined with books bound in many leathers. The ceiling was dark and pierced with the brass eyes of vents. In the far corner a furnace yawned. The heat that drifted from it had a personality. At its mouth stood Archmaester Cathan. He wore a plain robe, as always, a shade halfway between the color of ash and the color of old smoke. His chain was heavy, the links darkened by something more than age or coals, and his face was cradled in a salt-gray beard that was not carefully kept and so seemed to keep itself. He did not look up when Soreth entered. He was studying a shallow bowl whose surface shimmered like fish scales, though Soreth could not swear anything liquid lay in it. "You walked the right corridor," Cathan said. He had the voice of a man who does not need to raise his voice to be heard. "This is the part where you wonder whether you have done a wrong thing." "Have I?" Soreth asked. He could not help looking at the woman. She watched him with a kind of affectionate cruelty, as a courtier watches a dew. "Gee, who has learned a trick?" "Not yet." Cathan lifted his gaze. It was a large gaze, wide-set eyes beneath a forehead that had grown accustomed to carrying thoughts around. "That depends on whether you mean to turn back. I was told to bring this." Soreth held out the tube. "I am to return to the archivist after." The woman took the tube and rolled the seal under her thumb so that it broke with an unseemly pleasure. A curl of smoke slipped out and braided itself on the air. Soreth's nose filled with the memory of something from his childhood. The smell of his mother's copper pans when they had boiled honey and a bee had flown too close to the sweetness and died in it. He swallowed and felt his chain press his throat. "We do not always choose which doors come to our hands," Cathan said. He stepped from the furnace and the room shifted its attention to him. Soreth felt it like a change in pressure. "But we choose whether we go through them." "What is your name?" "Soreth Archmaester." "Soreth," Cathan repeated, as if the syllables had properties. "From the arbor beekeepers. You came here because the world is honey in both senses." Soreth colored. "Sir." He did not know whether he was being praised or insulted. "Sweeter than is good for it," the woman said and smiled. "Balandra of Lys." Soreth had thought it, but it was one thing to think and another to see the word clothed and standing in the room. "If we are to work, we should know what to call one another besides boy. Your hands are clean. They will not be by day's end." Cathan went back to the shimmering bowl. "We are about our business here, Soreth, and if you'd prefer to go to the archivist, then I will not keep you. No one should keep you, at least not for long. But if you have the hour, I will ask you to sit there and listen. The act of receiving information is a kindness to those who have collected it." Soreth sat where a stool had appeared. It placed him near the furnace, but not so near as to sweat. He realized, as the room arranged itself around him, that he had already decided not to leave. Balandra lifted from the tube a sheaf of narrow papers bound in red thread. They were filled with diagrams of a sort Soreth had seen only in Valyrian volumes kept under chain. The lines spiraled and rose and intersected like a nest of serpents trying to instruct themselves on how to become a braid. Cathan glanced at the pages, nodded, and laid them beside the shimmering bowl. The light off that quicksilver surface made the ink swim as if the drawings were thinking. "We are not alchemists," Cathan said. His hand indicated the room, and Sorith's eyes obeyed. "We have been accused of it, and we have sometimes flirted with the name, because names are very like locks, and it pleases some men to feel keys in their hands. But the art of changing one thing into another through the collusion of lies and heat is not our art. Our art is truer and cooler. We are historians of flame." Sorith opened his mouth and closed it. Belandra's laughter was soft. "He wants to ask whether flame has history. He has not yet seen the way a candle remembers the shape of the room in which it burned. He has not yet been shown that ash is a kind of script. Flame, like blood, remembers," Cathan said, and the words found a place in the air as if they had been waiting. In old Valyria, flame and blood were taught to speak to one another. It was not all wickedness. There were healers among them as beautiful as any cruelty. He lifted a small vial from near the bowl and held it to the light. The liquid within was the color of tea and the devilment in tea. Sorith's mouth watered in an old reflex. "The dragons are gone," he said without apology. "You know this. The world knows this. The skulls in the King's Hall are dust at the edges. But bones and shells and old fire are not nothing. If you heat a pan in which honey has burned, the scent returns. We are heating a pan." Belandra's eyes did not leave Sorith's face. "There is a word for what we are doing," she said. "But your tongue dislikes it." Sorith's mind said the word. It was not his word, but it lived in the tide pools of rumor that lapped the Citadel steps. Blood. The novices said it with relish, the way boys say whore. The Archmaesters did not say it in public. In the starry September across the square, the Septon made a face when he said it, like a man biting a clove and finding a gull in his mouth. "We are not slaughterers," Cathan said, hearing the word Sorith had not yet spoken. "We are not priests. We are not butchers. Blood, like flame, keeps a careful account. A very small change in the ledger can, sometimes, under the right accounting, be made to prove a very large argument." Sorith found he could breathe. He was grateful for that. The room, with its eyes of vents, put him in mind of a beast that slept with one eye open. "What is the argument?" he asked. "That the world has not forgotten how to make what it once made," Cathan said. "And that memory is a craft," Belandra said at the same time. She and Cathan did not look at each other when they double spoke. It was not a trick. It was a habit. Cathan moved, and the bowl's surface deepened shade upon shade, the way a river becomes darker where a cloud sails over. He took up a small rod of black glass and drew it through the bowl's surface, once, twice. Light folded. Sorith had the sensation of lifting his eyelids too slowly. The room's edges softened and sharpened. The smell of roses in iron strengthened. Somewhere far above them a bell rang, and Sorith thought, absurdly, of a hive when a queen is prepared to fly. "Look," Belandra murmured. Sorith looked. On the bowl's surface there was a darkness that was not simply lack of light. It had scales in it if darkness could have scales. The scales were arranged in rosettes around nothing. And then, as his mind began to name the shape altered under the naming. He saw not a shape but a process. Something not present remembering the way it had once been present. The hairs on his forearms lifted one by one, like novices answering their names in the yard. "What you are seeing," Cathan said, "is the record of a thing that burned. We coax flame to speak of what it has devoured. Bone does this too in a different grammar. So does shell, so does blood. All records are partial. We are binders. It is a..." Sorith began, and the word egg came and stood at the door of his mouth and did not knock. "Call it what you like," Belandra said. "Call it a word the world once said and then forgot how to. We are reminding it." The bowl went still as a sleeping pond. Cathan set the black rod aside and it did not roll. "When I say we are not alchemists, Sorith," he said, "I do not mean we are cowards. You came through 7 locks. We know what that makes us. There is a part of the Citadel that will never forgive us for even looking. There is a part that will forgive and call it method afterwards. I have written 30 letters to 30 men who once called me friend. I have answers from 4. He looked down at his hands. In Lys, he said, there is a school that has never entirely closed its doors. They remember, not as well as they think and not as badly as people say. Belandra comes of that place. She has taught me manners among the dead. Among memories, Belandra corrected gently. Cathan inclined his head. Perhaps that is all I mean by dead. Sorith's heart, which had been beating very properly, performed a misstep and then corrected itself. He folded his hands inside the apron, the way he used to fold them in church to keep them from reaching for the honeycomb his father had set to drain. What? He said, and realized that his voice was not as steady as he liked. Would you have me do? Belandra set down the tube's papers. We will ask you to copy, she said. We will ask you to hold. We will ask you to walk without telling your footsteps to the floor. We will ask you to say nothing when a man with a heavier chain than yours asks you many questions as if each was a piece of fruit he meant to buy and bite. We will ask you to keep your kind fingers where we can see them when we carry a thing that must not be dropped. And to listen, Cathan said. Some ears are particularly shaped. I have missed this specific shape of ear in my students and my brothers. You will do for a little while. If you leave after a day, I will not curse you. If you stay after a day, I will curse you kindly. Sorith nodded. It was an uneducated nod. He rose, and when he rose, he saw, on a low stand near the furnace, a thing that had been covered with cloth. It was not his business. It had not been his business a moment ago. Now his feet, borrowers of a will sometimes too bold for their bones, took him to the stand. The cloth was simple. Its weave showed the thinnest lines where the loom had decided to say something of itself. He lifted it. It was a stone with the shape of an egg and the color of river mud with iron in it. Something in the way it rested on its stand told the eye that it had been set that way a long time ago and had been moved many times in that long time, and the stand had learned its weight, and the stone had learned the shape of the stand. Sorith had never touched anything that felt so patient. The surface was banded with minerals, crescents upon crescents like dried waves. When he put his palm to it, it was not warm, but it was not cold. It had a temperature like a hand that has rested a long while in the shade. Belandra, who had been watching his face and not his hand, exhaled. It was a small breath, as if she had been holding it since long before Sorith was born. Cathan did not move. The furnace made a quiet sound, a throat clearing in iron. You will tell me I have no business, Sorith said, and did not remove his hand. On the contrary, Belandra said, it recalled you. That is business. It is made of what remains. We make a great fuss about the parts of a thing that are absent. We weep over them as a widow weeps over the chair where a man does not sit. But a chair is still a chair. Touch the crest near the mark. Sorith did not ask which mark. His fingers found a slight roughness, the place where someone before him had tested it with a knife point perhaps, the years making the wound simple. He pressed. The stone drank his skin as a window drinks the heat of a face. He closed his eyes. It was not a vision, for nothing played before his eyes. It was a posture within the bones, as if an old soldier of his marrow had sat up to listen to the command. He thought of the first time he had opened a hive without his father's hand over his hand. The first time the bees had not risen in anger because he had come into their rooms with the mind of a brother and not a thief. He thought of smoke lying soft in sunlight. Then, and this belonged to no language he owned, he felt, somewhere far to the east of his sternum, a series of small doors being opened in narrow halls. He removed his hand. The room returned. He inhaled and held the air in his mouth to taste it. It tasted like the moment after a prayer, when you wait to see whether something has changed, and because your waiting is so attentive, something has. You will do to begin with, Cathan said, with the restrained satisfaction of someone discovering that the thread he needed had been right there in the drawer under the bread knives all along. Sorith's chain weighed him down. He lifted the cloth with an attempt at reverence that was less clumsy than it might have been and covered the stone. His fingers trembled. He remembered the far shelves. He thought with a kind of superstitious common sense of the archivist who would ask him how many jars of scentless oil sat on the last 2 planks and whether the far wall smelled of lime. He thought of the return to normal duty with the weight of an odd song in his ears. He bowed to the Archmaester, a messy bow learned from sea captains, and to Belandra because it seemed wrong not to, and the smile she gave him was the smile a cat gives a dish that has finally been placed just so. "After dark," Cathan said, as if deciding on the weather. "You will go to the far shelves now, and to Ulmer if he calls you. Come back when the high tower's light is at its 3rd shift." Soreth left by the 7-locked door, and the fish returned to their afloat. The corridor seemed not so old as it had, and then, a moment later, older. He made himself walk the way a man walks who has only ever carried water. He counted his steps because there is no reason that counting should not be a prayer. The far shelves were not glamorous. You descended through a throat of narrow stone, tight enough that men with the bellies of well-fed clerks complained and sent their boys. The air down there was a kind of wine for a certain hunger. The shelves went on and on, a country of ledgers and bottles and rolled maps, of catalogues that lay their heads together like ancient conspirators. Soreth liked the far shelves because they made men of importance small. Here the only crowns were the brass caps of bottles. Here the only feasts were the feast of letters upon letters. He walked among the rows, the soft wheeze of his lantern a comfort in the blind. He could have done it by touch, the catalog numbers a script his hands read more fluently than his eyes. He counted jars. He recorded the exhalations of oils. He wrote down 3 times the word empty where there had been full last season. He found the place where lime had fretted a seam, noted it, and moved on. He stood still once, because a sound had come near him like something small dragging a ribbon. And when he held his breath it came again, and he understood it was only the river, speaking through an impatience in the stone. Up in the rooms of daylight, the Citadel unfurled its business like a sail. He saw men he knew by the angle of their steps and not their faces. He saw women whose talk about infants and debts had its own liturgy. At midday he ate with 4 other novices on the low wall by the inner court. They spoke of a sailor whose ship had come in with a golden bird on its prow and a broken rudder, of a lecture the day before where Archmaester Jimelin had argued that a certain species of frog did not exist except in the fancies of sailors and addle-minded boys, of a rumor that someone had been seen walking the upper ramparts at an hour when decent men slept and indecent men stumbled. Soreth listened and did not speak. He imagined instead the egg under its cloth, and the taste of iron and rose, and the bowl on which darkness had scaled like a book closing upon itself. He imagined his father, whose silence had been a padlock that closed over his talk whenever strangers came. He imagined the bees, their little bodily volumes in the air. At the starry September, toward afternoon, the great swinging incenses were lit and their smoke moved like the breath of men in cold air. Brother Lomas saw Soreth coming across the square and raised his hand in greeting. Lomas looked as though he had been made out of leftover pieces from a variety of statues, but the sum was kind. His kindness had weight and was not free. He had a voice like dry reeds, a good voice for reading lists of those to be buried and those to be brought broth. "You walk heavy," Lomas said, as if criticizing a loaf. "You do not usually. The far shelves are dust," Soreth said. He stood with his hands behind his back to persuade them to be proper. "Dust keeps men honest," Lomas said. "The layers of it confess. There is more work to confess than there is sin." He looked at Soreth and his eyes sharpened. "What door did you go through this morning that you had not gone through before?" Soreth looked down at his boots. He should have cleaned them. River mud, in a dry afternoon, likes to pretend it is dust. "A door with 7 locks, he said, "because sometimes the way to honor a man is to give him some of what he asks if you will not give him all." Lomas stood very still. The smoke off the incense bells went by in a slow river. "You will be careful," he said after a moment. "Carefulness is a kind of devotion men rarely honor. We honor bravery because it lets us tell stories. Carefulness spares us stories of the wrong kind." "The world will be safer if I count jars," Soreth said. with a tiredness that had not been in him that morning. "The world will be safer if you know what the jars are for," Lomas countered. "I say my prayers to 7 different faces. Every one of those faces has a hand behind it." Soreth inclined his head and let the smoke pass over him like a shawl. He did not promise anything. Promises, where 7 locks lay, were a luxury. He thanked Lomas for something he could not name and went away into the long shade of the Hightower's afternoon. When the sun had moved far enough to gild the tips of the Hightower's crenels, he returned to the 7-locked door. The fish were still not impressed. He placed the pin, pressed the 4th lock through its sulk, and entered with a step that had practiced not sneaking. Belandra sat with her feet on a coffer, reading, her robe emptied of the morning's candor. Cathan stood speaking with a young man whose skin was the color of tanned parchment and whose hair had the black of ink before it dries. The young man wore no chain, and his hands were long. "This is Darien," Belandra said, without lifting her gaze from her book. "Darien is what passes for Valyrian in our years. His father could not choose a city and so found a woman on a voyage between 2. The blood is idle in him, good. Idle blood does not make men foolish. It still answers when spoken to." Darien smiled with courtesy. "I carry letters for the Mummers Guild sometimes," he said, as if this were the kind of confession one makes to fellow students to prove they are not only their studies. "I row 1 NI, GHT in 12 for coin. I have never seen a dragon, though a man told me once he had a tooth from one and I paid 3 coppers to look, and it was a dog's tooth. There are more dogs' teeth in the world than dragons," Cathan said. "This is not a scandal." Darien showed his palms. There was a nervousness to him that Soreth recognized in himself at that age. A wish to help and to be seen to help that made the air around him hot by half a degree. Soreth found himself liking him at once for the respectable reason that he reminded Soreth that he was not the only creature to come into rooms with the wrong heartbeat. "We are making a vessel," Cathan said. "Not in the way an apprentice cooper means. We are constructing a memory and asking it to take a shape. The body we ask to house it will not answer unless the question is asked in a language it recognizes." "Which is blood," Darien said, awkward but proud of knowing. He tried to look at the covered egg without looking at it. "Which is a lexicon we are translating into," Belandra corrected. "We will not boast knowledge we have not earned. A very little blood, Soreth. A quantity that leaves the donor standing. I have watched very old men faint at the sight of a spoonful that left them as rich as a lord afterward. Darien is young and will not faint. If he does, he will do so gracefully and without breaking anything." Soreth's mouth had become very dry. There are moments when the body misunderstands the stakes and behaves as if invited to a gallows. His mouth thought it reasonable to go pasty and thick. He wiped his hands on his apron and said, because there was nothing else to say, "How may I be of use?" "You hold this bowl," Belandra said, and placed in his hands a vessel of white clay that had hairline cracks as delicate as the veins in a newborn's eyelid. Its inside had been glazed with something that took the light and softened it in return. It weighed more than he expected, as if it had been fired with pebbles in its belly. Cathan unstoppered a small glass and poured into the bowl a liquid that looked like water but which did not wet the rim as water does. Its meniscus was too precise, its skin too proud. Belandra bound Darien's right arm with a strip of soft leather, spoke to him in a language that had the softness of Lys and the discipline of Valyria, and smiled when his pulse came up under her fingers. "Look at Soreth," she said. "Do not look at the bowl, do not look at your arm, do not look at the door, do not look at me. Look at Soreth and tell me a story about the river." "I do not have stories," Darien said, and looked at Soreth obediently. It is possible to look at a man and see instead the place he stands. Darien did this. "Once I saw a dead fish float past, and on its belly a butterfly rode and opened and closed its wings. The wings were blue. The fish was very green. The river went on considering the high tower, and it did not see either creature. The wind was wrong for butterflies. That is all." "That is enough," Belandra said, and pricked his arm with a sting Soreth did not see. The blood that welled was the color of garnet and behaved as all blood behaves when coaxed into the world, with stubbornness and generosity, both. It fell into the waiting water with the decorum of a coin into a fountain. It spread and drew itself up again, reluctant to perish. Soreth held the bowl with both hands and felt his palms begin to sweat. This was ridiculous. There were men in the square who carried more than this bowl by the dozens in the heat of noon. He adjusted his hold and the clay whispered in his hands. Cathan took up the black glass rod and stirred the water, not as a woman stirs soup, but as a priest might stir his censer. The blood made a grammar in the white. The water kept the grammar from flying to pieces. Belandra bound Darian's arm with a neatness that made the entire business seem like mending a sleeve. "How do you feel?" she asked him, with the professional pity of one who asks a rat how it fares in a maze with bread at the end. "Extremely," Darian said, and then laughed at the unhelpfulness of the word. "We have men," Cathan said, "who will howl that we have done something wicked. They think wickedness is a potion that comes in bottles with skulls on. Wickedness comes in rooms like this in the shape of easy ways. We do not take the ease. We take the cost and measure it. Keep that cost in your palms, Soreth. Make it heavy." Soreth made it heavy. He watched Cathan lift a pinch of something from a paper cone and let it fall into the bowl with the cheap drama of snowfall on stage. The water did nothing, which was perhaps the most impressive thing. Belandra took the cloth from the egg the way one removes a napkin from an old man's knee, and Soreth's hands trembled with the urge to reach and smooth the skin of stone, as if it were a worry that would go away under kindness. He did not move. Cathan swirled the rod twice and not a third time. Darian breathed as if he had been running, though he had not moved. Belandra touched the roughness near the mark. "Memory asks for fire," Cathan said, "not heat. The hearth is a faithful servant. It dries chilblains and bread. Fire is a language. The difference is not easily taught to those who have not known a house that burned at night." He gestured with his chin. "Belandra." Belandra lifted a glass instrument that had a heart of black stone. It was not a candle, though some part of Soreth wanted to call it one because his mind had limited words for sometimes lights. She held it over the bowl, not touching, and Soreth felt the small hairs on his wrist try to stand. Something moved in his ear, the littlest spider of a sound. It came from everywhere at once, and nowhere present. He looked at the egg, and for an instant he saw the slightest change in the polish of the old stone. A minute that could be error, the eye's fault, or more. Darian had closed his eyes. His chest rose. He looked, in that second, very young. Soreth understood that he was younger than Soreth by 2 years, perhaps 3, and he pitied him for those 2 or 3 years the way one pities a child in the rain for being 2 inches shorter than the roof. The bowl warmed. It warmed in that careful manner of a stone that has been set in the sun for hours and that releases its warmth to your hands slowly, as if it had decided you were not yet to be trusted with the whole of it. Soreth held. His arms sang their fatigue. In the furnace's mouth, where the coals pretended to be quiet, a little tongue of blue showed itself and withdrew. Belandra's face changed, some veil between muscle and bone pulling aside a fraction. Cathan stood like a man trying to hear the difference between a lie and a song. "Enough," Belandra said, and took the rod from Cathan's hand. She touched Soreth's knuckle with the back of her finger, understood his trembling without remarking upon it, and poured the bowl's contents into a narrow-necked bottle whose lip was warmed to receive it. The liquid's surface rose and smoothed as if it had ironed itself. Darian opened his eyes. "Do I still exist?" he asked, with good humor that was not entirely false. "You exist," Cathan said, and patted his shoulder with a father's absent-minded love for good sons and good tools. "Eat something salty. Sit down when you think too much. Do not pick up heavy things that resent you. Come back in a day." Darian left with the politeness of someone who was used to leaving rooms without closing them behind him. Soreth set the bowl aside, palms stinging with the memory of its heat. Belandra lifted the bottle and turned it so the light ran down its spine. Inside, something as delicate as smoke arranged itself. She set it upon a stand near the egg, and for the span of a sigh the two things, stone and little river, seemed to recognize each other without touching. The stands would made a sound, as if tired. "Tonight," Cathan said, He sounded weary and very alive. We will not be heroes. We will not try to be men for whom songs are sung. We will be men who work a little into the night and then wash the dust from our hands and sleep. Forgive me, Soreth said, and his voice surprised him with its smallness, its child habit. Forgive me, he said again, which was foolish for a man who had not been accused of anything. But why us? Why the Citadel? You say there is a school in Lys. You say there are men elsewhere with thinner chains and thicker courage. Why do this here, under these stones that dislike heat? Cathan watched him with that large gaze. Because, he said, if the world learns to say old words again, the place where it learns must be a place that writes them down. Otherwise, it will not be the world learning. It will be a handful of men mumbling to themselves in treasure caves. We belong to the world, Soreth. Even those of us who have married secret work have taken their vows to public truth. Your chain is a marriage contract. You do not yet understand the spouse. You will. Belandra blew out a candle and the room shifted. Shadows crept into different corners, like cats exchanging chairs. Do you think the Citadel has not always kept a small room for the improper? She asked, amused. Where do you imagine the recipes for poisons go when they are not being tutored? Where do the records of wars go when kings wish their names to be clean on page? We have always been a little more than the face we show to boys in the yard. This is a little more. No more wicked than teaching a boy to sharpen a knife well. Soreth thought of Brother Lomas's talk of carefulness. He thought of easy ways and the songs of wrong kind. He thought of bees and their unargued competence. He took a breath that felt borrowed and nodded. Tell me what to do, he said. They told him what to do and what not to do. Much of it was the work of his hands. Wipe this heat that, fold in. Do not let air ask questions where none are to be answered. The rest was the work of his mouth being closed. There were recipes that were not recipes, instructions that trusted more to artistry than to list. Belandra's terms for certain gestures were not the Citadel's terms. The first time she took his wrist and guided his hand over the slender neck of a flask, he felt a heat move up his arm that had nothing to do with the furnace. He betrayed none of it. She laid his hand to rest. The bottle will know your temper, she said. Be meek with it. At the third shift of the high tower's light, when the beacon turned in its old slow circle and the fog had come in again to grease the steps and blur the angles of the world, they began. The egg sat in its stand, the cloth away. In the brazier, coals lay like embers of a city seen from far at night. Cathan held the bottle with the blood water. Belandra held the black stone knot candle. Soreth, whose job was very small and very important, held a spoon so thin it had its own music when he touched it to the bottle's lip. He had never held a spoon with more love, not even as a child when the spoon had been a boat on soup. Cathan's voice did not chant. He was not a priest. He spoke in the measured tone of a man reading a record aloud so that everyone in the room may be corrected if they have misread a line. He said names of places that had no human map. He said the weights of things as if they were the names of men long dead. He spoke of warmth as if it were a visitor whose guest right must be carefully observed and never abused. Soreth's mouth went dry again. Belandra's eyes were half closed, not in ecstasy but in calculation. She moved the black stone slowly and the air answered her with small changes in its thickness. The glass of the furnace door fogged and cleared. Soreth, with his spoon, took little half-moons of the blood water and laid them upon the egg the way one feeds a sleeping animal so that it will not startle. The liquid clung, then seeped, then vani. Shed from the surface as if the old stone had lips and had licked it. The spoon sang once. The little song was almost nothing. Cathan's hands dipped and rose. Belandra's breath went quiet. In the metal runs of the vents, air paused to listen and then went about its business. Nothing happened. Nothing in that room was a huge animal. It lay there and breathed as soft as felt. Soreth felt its warmth and wanted to apologize for being disappointed in it. His arms ached. The bowl was empty. The egg had drunk as much of memory as they had thought wise for a first night. Belandra set down her stone with a care she had not shown anywhere else in the evening. Cathan took a step back and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Good, he said, and sat upon a stool. That is exactly what we wanted. Soreth swallowed past the disappointment in his throat. He had been a child once who had planted a seed in a cracked cup and had come back 3 times in a day to see whether it had grown, and had wept at night because it had not, and had woken to find a green thing in the dark like a word spelled by a stranger's hand. He said nothing. Belandra looked at him sidelong and smiled, not cruelly. "You will go home," she said. "You will sleep. In your sleep you will hear a small sound that you will think is a fly against the window. It is not. In the morning, the fly will not be there." Soreth's mouth smiled without his instruction. It was not an agreeable smile entirely. "You ask a great deal of my trust," he said. "I ask a great deal of your patience," she corrected. "Trust is for gods and lovers. Patience is for men with real work." He stood for a few breathing in and out minutes longer while they put the room to bed. The tools looked like animals covered for winter. The furnace had its face shut and hummed like a man telling himself a story. Cathan sat and wrote 3 lines in a book the thickness of a brick. Belandra tied her robe tighter than it had been earlier. Soreth put his hands on the stand from which the egg had journeyed and felt its old indentations. He placed the cloth over the egg and did not press it down. He let it lie like a thin fog. On his way out, he passed through the old corridor. The fish watched. In the square, the fog had thickened to a substance. Lanterns on poles made halos of honest light, the kind that says, "This far and no farther." Soreth walked across the court and gave the starry September his habitual nod without entering. He climbed the steps to the dormitory, which differed in sound from the day. Men sleep in different voices than they speak. He lay down under the rough blanket he had washed himself and thought of blue butterflies and green fish and a river that did not attend to either. He folded his hands as he had been taught and unfurled them the way he had taught himself and slept. In his sleep, a sound came into the room like a word mispronounced by a small child, whom no one corrected because the mispronunciation was a charm. It buzzed faintly behind the ear and then somewhere far away under stone, and then as near as his jaw. He did not wake. He turned his face toward it and his mouth made a shape he would not remember. The sound departed on feet like dust. In the morning he washed his face in cold water until the skin stung. He trimmed his nails and felt virtuous. He went to the ravelry and swore gently at a bird who had learned to untie the string that bound the little brass tube to his leg. He did not knock when he passed Brother Lomas, because the smoke at the sept's door made him cough, and there is such a thing as courtesy to lungs. He ate porridge that had been burned at the edges and put honey on it without irony. Mid-morning brought a shower of rain that did not make it to the ground, turning in the air to bright dust. At midday the high tower's flag streamed and snapped in a wind that was not present in the square, and he thought of Belandra's careful moving of the black stone, and he thought of winds that happened within rooms, and he thought of his spoon singing its half note. He took himself down to the far shelves. He found the lime seam. He found 6 bottles of scentless oil, either miscounted or stolen, and he wrote down their names in his book with a style of letter that said, "If you have been stolen, I will not punish you. If you have been miscounted, I will not forgive you." A mouse passed his boot with the arrogance of men who wear swords in peace. He did not step on it. He climbed and descended, counted, recorded. He was a good novice. There are victories the world does not see because the world has eaten sugar and wants bigger sweets. Soreth gave himself the taste of quiet work and did not let himself be discontented with it. Toward late afternoon, a boy from the kitchens came with a basket of bread and cheese for the lower workers. He pressed upon Soreth a slice with too much rind. Soreth thanked him and bit into it with a moral fervor beyond the capacity of the cheese. He was halfway through when he felt it, the small change, the notch in the day. He would later describe it as the way the house feels when a woman you love enters a room downstairs you cannot see. The air acquired knowledge. He put the bread down and did not run. The fish could have become impressed if they were susceptible to such sensations. They did not. They only watched with their glass. He pressed the pin. He opened the locks. He entered. The room was as before, but the light in it had been slightly rewritten. Cathan stood by the stand where the egg lay. He had not moved for some time. Soreth knew this in the way he knew whether a book had recently been opened by the way the dust lay on its spine. Belandra was not seated. She stood with her arms crossed, the unimpressed posture of a woman who will not give you what you want until you admit precisely what that is. Soreth reached the stand and looked. The egg was still a stone in a basket of wood. Its banded surface had the same ancient patience. His hand hovered, and then did not hover because hovering is a weakness. He placed his palm gently near the mark he had touched yesterday. He did not press. The room did not sigh. His skin did. He forced his breath to be slow. Under his palm, very deep, very far, as if down at the bottom of a well where boys dare each other to drop their voices and listen for their fall. There was a sound that was not a sound, a motion that was not motion. Changed, nothing visible. It was movement recognized by some creature in him older than his father, older than the man who taught his father to use a knife on hives. It was a measure. It was not a heartbeat, but had the arrogance of a heartbeat in its certainty. It said, "I remember how," or it said, "I will try to remember how." Soreth drew his hand away and hiccuped once like a child. Cathan did not look away from the egg, but he smiled in the corner of his beard. "Patience," he murmured. Belandra's eyes softened. "The window fly came," she said. "I dislike being right when the alternative would have been more restful." Soreth swallowed too quickly and coughed. He wanted immediately to work, to do something with his hands, to be a beekeeper again, to smoke the bees when they stirred. He said, "What do? We wait until dark," Cathan said. "We give it a second word in the old language and we see whether it pretends to understand. There are affectations even in stones, if you coax the performance from them." They did not work. They did not converse as if they were actors hired to play conversation at the corners of the stage. They busied themselves with a dozen little tasks in the shadow of the egg's possible pretense. Soreth copied the diagrams from the tube into the longer ledger and did not hurry because hurrying is a way to cheat the future of its work. Belandra cleaned the alembics with the bored love that belongs to the most treasured tools. Cathan wrote 3 letters and sanded them and did not seal them because sealing is a moment too grand to do in daylight. When the third shift came, they began again. Soreth held the spoon. Darian returned with a grin that apologized for his health. He ate salted nuts slowly with the seriousness of a man to whom the idea of salt had been newly revealed. Belandra displaced the air with her stone. Cathan spoke figures. The egg lazed in its cradle like something that had long ago committed itself to stillness. They fed it tiny dose upon tiny dose. The spoon sang twice. The furnace let out a blue sigh. Darian sat because he thought too much. Soreth's muscles burned with the tidy burn of proper work. And then, as small as a child's first word behind a door, a cracked sound came, too quiet for the room to own, a thread pulled inside stone. Soreth did not say he had heard it. Cathan did not say he had heard it. Belandra, whose ears belonged to another country and had learned new languages late and hard, closed her eyes for the space of a heartbeat that was not the egg's. Darian took a breath that he should not have taken in that pattern. The black stone had warmed to Belandra's hand in a way that made Soreth think of stubborn animals eventually taking fruit from unfamiliar palms. Another crack sound, not louder but more sure of itself. Not the proud crack of wood splitting in the fire. Not the haughty crack of frost on a pail at dawn. A shy crack, an argument between layers that wanted different things. Cathan said nothing. He lifted an eyebrow that meant something only to himself and perhaps to the language that traveled between his head and his chest. He adjusted the stand by the width of half a finger. Soreth's spoon shook in his hand and the blood water trembled in its bowl. Belandra moved the stone a finger's breadth in a direction that would not have occurred to a man. The sound recurred a third time and then did not return. The egg looked still like an egg. Soreth's eyes watered from staring. Darian chewed a nut with reverence, as if he were sorry to end its life. Cathan set his hands by his sides and the room, which had been holding itself in place the way a horse holds itself when not to obey is a matter of pride, relaxed one small muscle. "This is more than I hoped for," Cathan said, almost to himself. "Which means less than you fear," Belandra said, to the room at large. Soreth understood neither precisely. and perhaps that was the name of what he had joined. He wiped the spoon with a cloth that had had better days and worse. He replaced it in its place with the tenderness of a man arranging the head of a sleeping child. He resisted the impulse to touch the egg again because love is often indistinguishable from careless hunger. He watched Cathan cork the bottle with an expression that was not triumphant and not resigned, only awake. He walked home through fog and felt, for the first time, the high tower's light turning over him as something other than a civic convenience. The beacon's swing brushed him like the hand of a tall parent reassuring a child that the nights are not longer than the days at heart. He thought of men who would want to stop this, who would call down all the locked doors of the Citadel on the small sound they had coaxed in a room under the fish. He thought of how much easier it would have been to simply count jars forever. In the days that followed, the city lived its life in increments, and the small world of the seven-locked room lived a second life between those increments. Soreth learned the foolish names of tools that had serious work to do. He learned that Cathan ate like a bird when he thought and like a man when he feared. He learned that Belandra drank wine like someone to whom it was once forbidden, with relish and a ritual that did not apologize. He learned that Darian's nervousness was a bed for a courage that might in time grow too large for the lattices they had provided it. The conclave met twice and sent out 3 letters with seals that had no patience in their wax. Brother Lomas began to ask after Soreth's health with a solicitude that had small hooks in it. Maester Ulmer sacked a novice for lying about a broken cage and then gave the boy a fig at the door on his way out. The high tower's light faltered one night, and there were men in the taverns who said it was a sign and others who said it was wind and sea and oil and the stubbornness of old technology. On the 4th night, the egg gave them a heat that did not belong to the room. Not the heat of the furnace or men, but a heat that had no patience for the polite rules a chamber sets. It was small and evident. It came into Soreth's hand where his palm hovered without touching, as if the air between 2 skins had confessed to being thinner than it had pretended. Belandra had the stone in both hands. The tendons at her wrist told the story of a line pulled tight across a river. Cathan's voice slowed into sentences that did not exist anywhere but between one of his breaths and the next. Darian did not sit. He stood with his feet very carefully placed on the earth and his eyes open in a way that looked like prayer. They fed the egg the smallest dose. The spoon did not sing. It did not need to. The egg drank without theatrics. Soreth felt the breath of the room hitch even before he knew what it had hitched for. A hairline thread of red, a crimson more austere than wine and more honest than rust, waked and then slept under stone. It was not a glow. It was not even light. It was the vestige, the bruise, the memory of a light that came when no one invited it and stayed until you learned its name. They did not speak for a long time. Soreth's mind skittered away from words, the way a bee sometimes hits glass and cannot say at first why there is no flower smell in the flower color. When his tongue came back to him, he did not use it. Belandra bowed her head over the stone, only once, not as to a god, but as to a piece of work that had earned a craftsman's acknowledgement. Cathan closed his eyes and opened them, and in that interval saw a war and a wedding and a winter and the slow way a house falls down when a man does not love it. Soreth thought, not for the first time, that he would count jars to the end of his days and be content if it meant he could keep what had happened in this room from men who would do the wrong kind of harm to it. Lomas's counsel about carefulness went around and around in his head until it left a groove like water wearing stone. He laid the cloth over the egg, and the cloth rose the slightest hair at its center, as when a sleeping body draws breath. He and Darian walked up together that night without finding it odd. The fog had thinned. The river looked like glass that had been kissed by the night's mouth and was still wet with it. Darian shoved his hands into his pockets and made his shoulders look broader with the ancient trick of boys who are deciding whether they are men. He caught Soreth looking and laughed, and the laugh was a rope across the space. "Do you want it?" Darian asked. "I do not know what I mean precisely, but do you want it?" Soreth could have said 100 things. He could have said that wanting is the poorest counselor. He could have said that his father taught him to want clean hives, full cells, and gentle bees, and that this was none of those things. He could have said that wanting makes liars of men, usually first to themselves. He said, I want to know whether we can teach the world to say it without tearing our tongues to pieces. And I want to keep it from men who would teach it to say only what they wish to hear." Darian nodded as if he had understood perfectly, which is an art, as any bard will tell you. They parted at the stair, and Soreth slept and did not dream, which was itself a kind of dream. Days came, nights came, they fed the egg in drams and sighs. The conclave frowned and then smiled and then narrowed its eyes. Brother Lomas smelled smoke in Soreth's hair and said nothing, which Soreth placed in the ledger of Lomas's silent generosity. Maester Ulmer taught a raven a new trick and swore he had not. The high tower's light spun its old slow circle, and men queued their lives to it without thinking. Soreth learned that Belandra could weep without moving her mouth, and that Cathan could be cruel to men who deserved it without pleasure. And in the deep room, in the hush that holds its breath under the oldest stones, the egg woke by increments, and in those increments the world changed, though no one upstairs yet knew how. The crack sounds did not return for several nights. When they did, they were softer than before, as if the stone had learned something about pain and was no longer frightened of it. The red knot glow flickered, once, and Soreth, whose tyranny over his face had grown stricter, permitted his eyes to widen for a heartbeat in honor of it. When at last a fissure as fine as a hair showed in the stone, Soreth was not there to see it. He was in the far shelves, counting jars, being the best man in the world, because sometimes the best man in the world is the one who counts the jars. Belandra stood over the stand, arms folded, and did not touch the fissure with her eyes. "We will not rush it," she said to the room, and the room obeyed. Cathan wrote 3 more letters and sealed them. One went to a man in King's Landing with no patience, one to a woman in Bravos with too much, and one to the school in Liss, whose door would never be fully shut so long as men loved the wrong things with the right ferocity. He wrote in a hand that knew grief, and that is the only hand in which certain letters should be sent. Brother Lomas crossed Soreth's path with an anxiety he did not call by its name. "Do not let them ask too much of you," he said, as if speaking of tithes at market. "They ask only for my hands," Soreth said. "They ask for your eyes," Lomas corrected. "They ask for your sleep. They will not ask for your soul because they do not believe in souls. This is their advantage and their loss." Soreth bought a fig from a girl at the corner of the square and ate it with reverence for its ancient sweetness and its seeds that tasted like counsel. He went down into the old corridor and pressed the pin and pushed the 4th lock that sticks and entered the room he had begun to think of as a chapel in which the gods were not yet on the walls, only in the minds of the congregants. He did not touch the fissure. He did not even lean toward it. He stood where he had been told to stand, took up his spoon, and waited for Cathan to say the numbers in the order that was not an order anywhere else in the world but here. They would not turn back now. It was not hubris. Soreth knew hubris the way a bee knows the wind, by its rudeness and its insistence. This was work. The world had watched them build this small oven of memory and had not stopped them because the world did not yet believe in the bread they said would come of it. When the bread came, the world would make decisions. For now, the kneading went on. Soreth thought, as he measured the little drams, of what one does with a dragon once one has convinced a stone to say the old word. He did not think of riding, because that kind of boy's thought had been beaten out of him by the ropes of the ravenry and the leathery patience of the far shelves. He thought instead of books and of the way heat travels in air. He thought of how cities burn. He thought of law and of mercy and the queer arithmetic of the two. He thought of the way Brother Lomas had held his hand once across the small of a child's back when he had coughed and the stars in the sept had gone watery with men's breath. He laid the spoon down and breathed out through his nose and felt old, and the egg in the stand breathed in an old way, and the river turned, and the high tower's light swung, and the fish watched with their glass eyes, and in a room under 7 locks a very small creature was teaching itself the shape of its mouth.